Welcome. You're listening to a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast on Mental Health News Radio Network. Thank you for joining us. I'm Lori Lee Binstock, host of a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast on Mental Health News Radio Network and anywhere you get your podcast. Today's guest is Beverly Armento. Beverly is the author of her latest book, Life's Turning Points. Inspired by many teachers who mentored her, Beverly became an educator and enjoyed a multi-decade career working with middle school children as well as prospective teachers. Thank you so much for joining us, Beverly. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me, Laura Lee. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, your recent book, Life's Turning Point, it's a memoir about your life. Is that correct?
Yes, actually, the memoir is called Seeing Eye Girl, right? A Memoir of Madness, Resilience, and Hope.
That's right. That book was released in 2022.
That's correct. That's correct.
And so I want to get into your story, and then kind of get into life's turning points as well. Could you kind of briefly share your story and why you wrote these books?
Well, my story starts, of course, at the very beginning. And at the beginning of my life, and for the first 5 years, I had a great life. For 4 of those years, I was an only child. And even though it was at the beginning of World War II, I was sort of a pampered child. Every photograph of me in the early years, I'm dressed beautifully. And I recall having my own room. I had dolls, a dollhouse. I had an easel and paints. And I was a happy girl. I had a mother who loved me and a father who loved me, and I loved them. Everything that in my recollection and from all of the relatives that I've been able to locate indicate to me that those first foundation years, the most important years in the formation of your personality, your attitudes, was positive. And quite frankly, in retrospect, I attribute my optimism and my hopeful outlook to having that kind of a firm foundation in early childhood. When I was 5, though, things changed. And, you know, you don't really need to know all of the details, but you'll find them in Seeing Eye Girl. But at that point, I believe what happened was that my mother had a serious psychological break. My father left. My mother took up with a new man, and I think, whatever transpired between my mother and my mother had a great deal of hatred then for my father. And in some part, I think what happened next was a function of her attitude toward my father. Now, I I resemble my father dramatically, facial structure, coloring, everything, was my father. Perhaps I reminded her of my father. But in any case, that was the beginning. By the time I was 7, that was the beginning of physical and emotional abuse at the hands of my mother. My mother was also blind. She was totally blind by the time she had me when she was 19. And even by age 5, and definitely by age 7, I was her seeing eye girl. I was the one who guided her around the community, the grocery store, all of those things. And as I began to have siblings, I was the one who took care of the siblings, changing diapers, making formula, and organizing. When you live with a person who's blind, the house has to be organized in a certain way so that the person who can't see can find things. And especially if you have babies in the house. So, for example, we organized the kitchen cabinets with like baby food, fruits in one lane, and then vegetables in the next row, and
Mm.
then meats in the next row. So there was a system, and it was part of my job to maintain the system. And, remembering, if you will, that I was 7 at the time.
It's a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, so I sort of grew up pretty fast at that stage of my life. And lucky for me, I liked doing all those things. I liked washing dishes. I liked ironing clothes. I liked changing the diaper. Silly, but
Mhm.
but true. And so in part that made things easier. But as the beatings started at home, by that time we were in Miami in a housing project. So, there was not much money in the home. And for most of my years from age 7 on, we lived in public housing. And, there were social workers in and out of the home, bringing clothing for the kids, bringing food. Um, and at school, I'll tell you, Laura Lee, school was my safe place, as
Mm.
was church. And these are the safe places for many children who grow up in homes like mine that, mine became violent and traumatic and uncertain. You never knew when mama would sort of fly off the handle and decide it was time to find something that I had done wrong and come after me. But when I went to school, the world was a whole different place. Not only was I safe, but my teachers encouraged me. I found my voice. I allowed my personality to shine. I was sort of outgoing and gregarious, and, my hand was always up in the air. I loved learning, I loved school. And as you don't articulate or even consciously think about certain things when you're a kid. But in retrospect, as I look back on my life, I think I had a hopeful attitude even when I was a child. And,
Mm.
here's an example. Every day, my hope was that I would get to school the next day and I would get
Mm.
to school on time. And in order to do that, to make that a realistic goal, I knew what I had to do. I had to get up early enough to get my younger siblings up, get them cleaned up, get them dressed, give them
Wow.
breakfast, put the cereal away, put the milk away, get them brush teeth, all of that, and take the little ones to daycare, and then get me to Little River Elementary School on
On time.
time, on time, because that was important to me, on time. And in my maturity, as I became a teacher, that was very important to me. All of
Hmm.
my students will tell you, be on time for Dr. Armento's class. Uh, so, going to school seems like a small thing, but it was a big thing to a kid. And not only did I make a plan, I knew what I had to do, but I had the motivation, I had the agency, I had the willpower to
Mm.
make that happen every day. And that's what hope is all about. Having
Hmm.
a goal that you can achieve, making a plan that's workable, and then having the motivation to do your plan. And
Mm-hmm.
I did that day after day. As I became a little older, I had the audacity to think I might change my mother a little bit. And here's an example of hope and resilience sort of put together. So by the time I was about 8, 9, I would take children's stories and make them into plays. And I would teach my sister and my brother, who, my sister was 4 years younger than I, and then the brother was like 6 years younger than I. So I would teach them parts of the play. So then in the especially we would do a play if I needed something from my mother and I was scared to ask her.
Oh.
So here's a time that I talk about in my memoir where I needed money to I to buy material for a skirt that we were going to make in 4-H. The 4-H was associated with the school
Oh, wow.
as an after-school program, and each of the girls was going to make a skirt by hand. Yeah, I'm a lot older than you are. So these were the days when we sewed by hand. And, and so I needed material, I needed thread, all of those things. Um, so we did a play for Mama. She
Mhm.
would sit in the evenings and play cards with my stepfather. And so here come the kids. We made props out of, towels and clothes and um, boxes.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so we would put on a play. And usually, my mother and stepfather would smile and then they'd clap at the end. And then all the kids would leave. And then I'd take a deep breath and I ran back out to the kitchen and I'd say, Mama, I need material for a skirt I'm going to make in 4-H. And that particular time, she said to my stepfather, can you get these things for her? Just as easy as that.
Mm.
Now, I wasn't terribly successful, though, in the big picture of trying to change the environment because my mother, whatever was wrong, and she was never assessed, to my knowledge, as to the nature of the mental illness that she obviously did have. But I was never able to really change her behavior. So 17 years later, after, this kind of chronic trauma, I did finally break. And I think up until that time, I was able to kind of maintain my two selves. At home, I was really weak, Beverly. I tried to be invisible, stay out of the way, do everything right, get all my jobs done, do my homework, do all of those things. At school, I could be strong, Beverly, where
Mm.
I was smart and capable and loved and cared for. And, it was teachers that did that. Teachers
Yeah,
that
I
did
could.
that. And as I grew older, I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to give back to these teachers in some way. I want to create classrooms that are models of positivity and hopefulness, where every kid is respected, where every kid is viewed as brilliant, and
Mm.
and with teachers that know how to make that happen. So I taught elementary and middle school kids myself, and then I became a professor in the College of Education,
Mm-hmm.
taught prospective teachers. And, I found, I mean, I wasn't overtly a missionary, but I was sort of a missionary in my role as a teacher educator because I had a message to get across to prospective teachers. And that was just that. I didn't have to tell them about my life. I just told
Mm-hmm.
them a little bit about how important teachers were in my life and how important they are and were going to be in the lives of children. Um, and I think part of my mission now in my maturity is to is to continue that story, because I think sometimes we forget the power of teachers and counselors and coaches and people in religious places. These people are trusted adult mentors to many children who are are coming through difficult situations. It might
Mm-hmm.
be at home, it might be in the community. And today, school children have so many more factors playing a role in their lives than I did growing up. Social
Yeah.
media, guns in schools, those sorts of things cause fear, anxiety, trauma in children.
Yeah.
And as a society, we've got to think about what to do about these issues.
Yeah.
I think more and more people are talking about these uh, these issues. But
Yeah.
for me, having a hopeful attitude, even when I broke, and was seriously considering suicide,
Mm.
I found hope in the vision that I wanted to be a teacher. I
Mm.
wanted to be a teacher next year. I wanted to be a teacher 10 years from then. Little did I know it was going to turn out to be 50 years. But but
That's
hooray,
okay.
hooray.
Uh-huh.
I chose to live instead of driving into the Passaic River.
Mm.
And I think a lot of people find themselves at that crossroads. Um, and it's a difficult place to be. Um, and somehow, the search in your mind for what would a better tomorrow look like?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a
Yeah.
better tomorrow? How can I make it a better tomorrow?
Right.
What do I have to do? What's the path I need to take? And can I get up enough willpower to make that happen?
Yeah.
And if you can answer that, you can find hope.
You know, when I first started my healing journey, a friend of mine asked me, how is someone able to not let this trauma or anything destroy them because so many people have experienced trauma? And, that took me a little bit to think about because I spent a lot of my time just very, living within my trauma without even realizing it. But I
Yes.
think the first thing is awareness. But I believe that, I think my response was to her is that there was somebody there to validate them. There was someone there to make them feel like they were worth something because trauma can really tear you down. And I think that is what mentors are for. And I think that's amazing that you had those teachers who were there that made you even want to go to school the next day.
Having just one person, and I felt
Hmm.
like, um, you know, in elementary school, there was one person, self-contained classroom. Then it became many people. And, maybe they weren't wonderful to every child, but in my eyes, they were wonderful to me, all of them.
Yeah.
I cannot name a teacher that Well, maybe there was one there was a, you know, maybe there was one that ever said something kind of that put me down. But I think children also look for those mentors. So
Yeah.
maybe it's a meeting of people, but you're right, having one person who can say, you know, you need to persist. We
You're
need you.
worthy of
We
persisting.
need you in the world. You are
Yeah.
worthy. You are you are loved. You are
Yeah.
capable.
Did any of your mentors see that there was or recognize something that was wrong, that there was abuse at home?
Do you know, Laura Lee, no one ever said anything.
Mm.
However, when I was a young child, I remember like purposefully selecting clothing that would cover my black and blue.
Mhm.
And so I tried to conceal things. But if you've got a black eye, it's hard to
Oh.
conceal. And there were times my face was bruised or, bruises were visible. Now, back in the day, teachers were not required to report.
Mhm.
And teachers, maybe that's why they loved me so much. Maybe they
Oh.
saw something. Now, usually, um, teachers did not come to the home. There was one time for me, though, that teachers came to the home. And that was when I was in fourth grade. I was still in Miami. And I was the spelling bee champ in my school. And there was going
Wow.
to be a kind of a regional contest. And my mother kept me home from school that day to do the wash. And I tried to reason with her, tell her,
Wow.
this is a spelling bee day. I have to go to school. I'm the champion. um, she was not going to hear any of it. I stayed home to do the wash. And
Oh my
I,
goodness.
can you believe? So by mid morning, there's a knock on the screen door, and here are two teachers, and they're the spelling bee teachers. They were not my classroom teacher. And they came and they negotiated with my mother from from my release.
Oh my gosh.
They explained to her. And my mother was always able to maintain a very self-possessed presentation in front of other people. No
Yeah.
one ever believed that there was anything, quote, wrong with my mother because she's very lovely. Uh, and she's very, very smart. And she was able to present herself as a very capable, talented. She was artistic. Um, and when she had two of the earliest successful corneal transplants in the country.
Oh wow.
And all of a sudden, she and our family became a great human interest story. She was sort of discovered. We were all over newspapers, a big spread in Woman's Home Companion. We were on
Wow.
we were on This Is Your Life. I mean, it was big. And in every one of those cases where she was on television, she was the star. She was a star. So when the teachers came that day to get me, my mother was as lovely as could be. No one would ever suspect what went on after dark.
Oh my
Um,
goodness.
yeah. And but in any case, I went to school that afternoon and competed in the spelling bee. But for the most part, teachers did not acknowledge to me that they saw anything. They did not ask questions
Yeah.
about whether anything was going on. Today's a little different environment.
Right.
Teachers are required to report, and, sometimes that doesn't exactly turn out great for the kid. I was always afraid if I told anyone that my mother, w- w- that her behavior would increase rather than decrease.
Right. Right. That's always the fear, isn't
Did
it?
you feel that?
Yes, I did not, I was sexually abused as a child by my father. Everyone loved my father,
Right.
everyone loved seeing him, and and just from that, I didn't feel safe enough to tell other people because I didn't feel like people would believe me.
Exactly. Exactly. Exactly.
And you had your mother who was, seen on television,
She was
who was in
famous.
magazine. Yes. So I cannot imagine what that would be like. You know?
Well,
That's
it
hard.
takes uh, I mean, I don't think I'm any hero or any stronger than anyone else. The research on uh, adverse childhood experiences doesn't look really great. I mean,
Mhm.
I've read studies where it looks like longitudinal studies where it looks like about two-thirds of us don't survive well, either wind
Yeah.
up in the juvenile detention system or, they're so mentally harmed that they're not able to function in a
Mhm.
day-to-day manner.
Mhm.
And, people like you and I who turn out to be thriving, still carry the trauma. As
Mhm.
Bessel van der Kolk says, the body keeps the score.
That's right.
And the body does.
Mhm.
And it's a continual, you know, I'm in what they might call my senior years. And writing the book, and it took me a long time to write it. Why? I mean, I'm glad it took me a long time, but it took me a very, very long time. um, but I think I gained perspective and a little wisdom of being able to look back with mature eyes on that situation, doing a lot of research on on my own life. I mean, there's so many things I discovered I don't even know.
Yeah. Yeah.
and 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 I've discovered I've got my whole Italian side of the family, my father's side, has been unknown to me for most of my life. It's only within the last 20 years that
Oh,
I've
wow.
discovered I've got tons of cousins.
Mm.
Uh, so that's wonderful. But life is a great discovery if you keep investigating.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. So how long did it take you to get help? I know you said you felt suicidal. When was how long did it take for you to realize like something needs to change? I need to get better, feel better, and make those changes.
In my first year of teaching, I was still at home, of course, and that's when I kind of cracked. I mean,
Mm,
but I was, I did have a whole lot of strength because I also presented myself to my class every day as strong Beverly. I was their teacher and I was strong. No one ever had a clue
mm,
of what was happening when I went home. Um, I'm still in touch with those fourth graders that I taught that very first year, 1963 to 64.
wow.
They're now like 70. And they have read, there are about a dozen of them that I've been able to locate. They've read the book. They're shocked
Wow.
that this was going on while they knew me as their teacher. But So when I came, so it was that year that I was seriously contemplating suicide.
Mm,
I felt like I could not, and in my mind, my two choices were kill yourself or stay there. All of my friends were saying, leave. You have to leave. And I had such a strong and um, dysfunctional, codependent relationship with my mother that
yeah.
I felt responsible for her. I felt responsible for my two brothers who were still home, the youngest 13. I
Mm,
felt like the stepfather had walked out. My sister had gone to nursing school. I was supporting the family financially, which
wow.
which was fine with me. That wasn't a problem because I I felt it was my responsibility. What I couldn't take was it was almost like the physical and emotional abuse just would not go away. It was always there. It was worse than ever. And
Mm,
my resistance, my willpower, my strength was being worn down. I had like the great dark night of the soul when, all of a sudden, as I was talking to God, I had my teachers' voices, I had my students' voices all going on in my head. What should I do? What should I do? All of a sudden, I had this idea that I should leave, a thought that I resisted.
mm,
I did not think I was strong enough to leave. And I felt like I would break that. I could not break the chains of my relationship with my family and
yeah.
my kind of oversized sense of responsibility to the
Yeah.
family.
Wow.
But I had this vision that I needed to live because I had to teach and I wanted to teach. And that was the driving force. That became my goal. And then and then I'm still talking in my head. I think, well, it's the middle of the school year. I can't walk out on my class that I love. So I made a plan. I'll leave the last day of class. And to make the plan concrete, I'm going to take something to school with me every day, and I'm going to stash it in the cloak closet in a box, and and that'll be my link to the last day of school. So the very first day, I took one of my favorite literature books from college. And the
Mhm.
next day, I took a pair of underpants. And the next day, I took a book. So every day, I took something and I kept it there at school. And so it helped me maintain the goal in my mind and all of that. Anyway, the last day of school, I did run away from home
Wow.
as a 23-year-old adult. I,
Did
I, I
anyone
ran,
know you were leaving?
just a few close friends. One or two teachers that I was real close with, my sister, and I'd been back in touch with my real father, and that's where I
Mm,
was going. I was going to drive from New Jersey to Sarasota, Florida.
wow.
So my mother, when I didn't show up, she called the police. There was a 13 state alarm out for me.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
In any case, from that point, it took me 20 years to get professional help
Mm,
because I allowed strong Beverly to really thrive. I
mhm.
was a great teacher. I loved my teaching. I was making friends. I got a master's. I got a doctorate. I got a university position. I bought a home. I was like flying, flying. But meanwhile, back at the farm, I was having nightmares that my mother was going to find me and kill me. Um,
Wow.
that, I had developed a real serious eating disorder, and that was flourishing. And, you can go on and on. The
Mm.
trauma was still there, and I was ignoring it, like really just plain ignoring it.
Oh, yeah.
And I wasn't smart enough, as my father used to say, you're book smart, but I wasn't smart enough to see my own life and what I needed. But the turning point was when my stepbrother, my half brother, found me to tell me that Mama had died.
Mm.
That's when I that's when I cried. That's when I realized I, I need help.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
I tell you, I found the best. He was a psychiatrist, but he was like a talking psychiatrist.
Yeah, like a yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, therapist.
like a psychologist. He was, he turned my head around. He helped me change, the way I was thinking about myself, my trauma, my life, my mother, and really, that was a huge turning point for
Yeah.
me. To,
Well, you said something very interesting. You said, when I asked when was it that everything where you realized I things needed to change, and you said there was you hit a breaking point. It was a breaking point, which then turns into your turning point, and
that is
your
your,
right, your pivot, where it, and I feel like that's where trauma survivors are. Something has to happen where they recognize things are absolutely not right. Because I think we go through our lives thinking, okay, I've masked this. I'm not thinking about this anymore, and we're going to show up as strong Beverly,
that's
and
right.
that's what people see, and then we think that's the mirror that we can go off of, but there's stuff internally going on there.
That's right. And the sad thing is that turning point, is so critical and so powerful a time. You know, it would have been really easy for me to take another route. And when I think back to that time, and how I was so easily going between suicide and life, and when I hear about others taking their lives, um, you know, I don't know what, maybe, I mean, I guess what caused me to choose life was the strength of my goal,
Your purpose.
my purpose, that I was able I mean, I loved it so much. This had been my passion all the way growing up. And I think the strength of my purpose, and that I could see it clearly, that I knew I had to fight to make that happen. And
Mm.
that if I stayed there, I would never be a good teacher, because too much of me was being eaten away by this trauma that was
Hmm.
not going to change.
Right. So you needed to change.
I needed to
You
change.
needed to go somewhere where that wasn't bringing you down constantly.
Right,
Mm.
right. I had to change my environment. I had to get out of an abusive environment. I had to get away from my mother. And, that's a hard thing for people.
Yeah,
You know, you,
really is.
I don't know all of the situation with your father, but at some point, I'm sure you had to confront getting out of that situation.
Yeah. Yeah, that was I knew I needed to leave the town. Like I needed to go. You know, I needed to go as far as away as possible. And there was a point where, when I was like, I need to leave for college. And I remember my mom saying, "No, you might as well just stay here." And I'm like, "There's no way I will survive another day if I stay here." And at
Right,
this point, they didn't, my mom didn't know. Yeah, my dad had left, but he would came and left and came and left, and I think he would leave because he was scared at that point that I would say something because I started basically losing my mind. I was angry and
right.
unpredictable, and so I think that scared him. And while even though he was leaving, I knew I still needed to leave the house because,
Yeah.
you know, 15 years later, when I went back to my house, um no, it was like 20 years later, or no, 15. Yeah, I went back to my house and I remember my husband being like, "You seem very off." And I was like, and I felt very triggered. And I was, and a few months later, that's when he figured it out. That's when I had my breaking point where I attempted suicide, which I failed to do. And then I went and sought help. And then that was kind of my journey. But it's getting out of this, not being in the situation that caused the trauma, not the environment, getting out of the environment. Definitely.
I'm afraid so.
Hmm.
You have to get away. Um, you have to free yourself from all of that physically. And, of course, when you went back home, you were off.
Hmm.
That environment brought back all of those memories.
Yeah.
And that's really, that's really difficult.
Yeah. Really is. It really is. But you got out. I got out. And maybe that gives other people hope to be able to leave a difficult situation that they know that they need to heal from, and they just feel like the environment and the people around them are bringing them down.
That's right. That's right. And the thing that's going to help you make that break is to have a vision of 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 hope
Hmm.
that's manifested in a kind of an image of what you want your life to be like.
Yes.
And if you had that image, I think next you have to make sure you got enough willpower to pull it off.
Hmm.
And if the image is strong enough and you really want that better life for yourself, you really want to achieve that goal, there's only one way, and that is to free yourself physically from the trauma. Now,
That's right.
mentally will take a little bit longer, but physically
That's a start.
is a humongous start.
Hmm.
Because I think this notion of being codependent with the perpetrator of the abuse is an element of what you and I and so many others are going through. We feel responsible for that person. We feel like we have to cover for that person. We have to lie, ourselves. It puts us in such a situation that eats on our brain in very distorted ways.
That's right. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, Beverly, I really enjoyed speaking to you, and I do want to ask if there is anything else that you wanted to add.
I think the notion of hope is where is the message I want to give to people, and I do want to tell you that hope as a construct is being looked at seriously by researchers,
Mhm.
especially at the University of Oklahoma. They're
Mm.
doing so much work on hope. There's a camp hope for children like you and I
Mhm.
were, who are growing up in traumatic situations where children are
Right.
taught about hope. You can teach hope. You can learn to be hopeful.
Yes.
Isn't that wonderful? You don't have to
Mhm.
wait to be inspired. Hope is something that's concrete and that we can talk about. So there's research on this notion, how hope is related to cancer survivors, trauma survivors, the works. The works.
Yeah.
Hope is something that you can hang on to. It's not just an abstract concept. Make it
Mm.
real by having an image in your mind of how tomorrow can be a better day.
I love that. I really do. Yes, I think it's manifesting that. It's manifesting that.
That's
So,
right.
Beverly, thank you so much for joining me
Thank
today.
you,
I
Laura
truly
Lee.
appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me. I love our conversation.
Absolutely.
All
Thank
the
you.
best to you and
To you
and
too.
to your viewers.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
That was Beverly Armento. Beverly is the author of Life's Turning Points and her memoir, The Seeing Girl. And thank you so much for listening to this conversation. I do want to let you know that February's issue of Authentic Insider is out today. Check out Authentic Insider at traumasurvivorthriver.com. That's traumasurvivorthriver.com. And if you want to check out information on Beverly, you can go check out the show notes. You can find the links to her books and her website. And you can find past issues of Authentic Insider too, and past episodes of a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast. Also, if you haven't already, please subscribe to my email list to get Authentic Insider magazine in your inbox monthly. You've been listening to a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast on Mental Health News Radio Network. I'm Lori Lee Binstock. Thank you so much for being a part of the conversation. Take care.